Hello everybody, and how are you? I hope you're doing well. And I'm hoping my chair is not going to squeak too much. I've just realised how much it's squeaking at me. Only because I'm noise aware at the moment because there was a lot of noise outside and I assumed it was someone who was grinding some metal. I think actually since then that it's actually someone cutting some concrete. A very loud noisy saw, but not right immediately next to me, but still, sorry, my nose is itchy. But still pretty noisy, so I've had to shut the skylights. So it's going to get rather warm. Sorry. I'll try not to dribble all over the microphone because I'm pretty sure that will actually affect its sound. Hi, I'm Jev. I live in NZ, also known as New Zealand, and I read old-fashioned children's stories. Why? Because sometimes we just need somewhere else to be in our heads, somewhere away from the current way the world is, the busyness, the pandemic, stress at work, all that sort of thing. Hi, how are you? Good to have you here. All those sort of things. Sometimes you just need something else to do, and you can actually be doing some other things while you're listening to a story. So my daughter listens to audiobooks when she does sewing projects. A great way to do them, because it gives your mind something to think about while your hands are busy doing something. And sometimes if you're doing something that's just hands work, your brain says, let's go and do this. And you find yourself distracted and you go and do other things instead of the job that you're trying to get done. I do the same when I'm ironing. Not that I iron very often, but just very occasionally, if I have to iron, then that's what I will be doing. I'll listen to an audiobook. Sometimes it's good when you're cooking too. If you're cooking in the kitchen on your own, it's a good way to actually keep your hands and your eyes focused on something while you're listening to something else. My stories are not audiobooks. They have all of this weird extra information. They have me interrupting myself, me losing where I am in a sentence, very commonly. Not a problem, because these are rough reads. These are reads of the sort that you would have, well, I would have had, I did have, and my children had, as bedtime stories, where somebody's reading something and somebody else is getting fidgety and wants you to get to the point of the story or the chapter or whatever, or is not listening properly and thought you said something weird and you have to repeat it and that sort of stuff. So it's really very much like real life sort of thing, the way we do our stories here. We are going to start a new book. It's new for us. And our next book called Just William by a lady called Richmal Crompton. And I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she is famous for writing the Just William stories. She did actually write a bunch of other ones, but this is the stuff that people remember her for. My dad loved the stories when he was growing up. And because he'd loved them and came across a couple of his old copies, he passed them on to me. And so when I was old enough to be reading, and he'd found the books, so I then read them and thoroughly enjoyed them. He's a little bit of a mischief maker, but usually not intending to be, although sometimes he can be a little bit of a rascal. So we'll see how this goes. And I think that, no, I've got to tell you the things I always tell you. I hope you've got something to drink. This is my water bottle. I hope you've got something to drink and something to snack on. I've got some popcorn. Somebody reminded me of popcorn the other day. Thank you, Minnie. Something to drink, something to snack on, and somewhere comfortable to sit. And if you have, great, I'm about to start reading. And if you haven't, quickly run off and get them. Take your phone with you so you can listen while you're getting them. Anyway. And I've got my coffee. So I'll just have a mouthful of that before I start reading. Right, and here we go. I'm just checking that I have everything in place. I don't have any pictures lined up to show you this time, I'm sorry. I will see if I can get that done before we read next time. And there are several books, there are quite a few books in this series, although I've only actually got 3 on my iPad. Oh, that's the other thing, is I read from an old iPad mini, first generation iPad mini, which this is brilliant for it because it gives it something it can still do whereas it can't do most things like putting new apps on it or even older apps because they're out of date. But it's built-in book reader, brilliant. And the same with its browser, so I can actually go to Project Gutenberg to get books to read to you. Eventually, I shall be finding more of my own physical books, because ebooks are real books. It's just you don't actually have pages to turn, and reading from them as I go sorting through boxes. So here's one that I found. These are two that I found down at my mum and dad's place, which I remember reading at some stage, one of which I may actually end up reading to you in the future. And the other one I've already read to you, but I read it as an ebook. So this is Losing and Finding, also known as The Moonstone Ring, by a lady called Jenny Chappell. And it's probably one of those moralizing stories. But hey, one of the things we can do with reading those sort of books is go, different world, great, less stress or different stress, and isn't it good that we don't actually have to live like that? So we can still get something positive out of it. And the other one, I knew that was going to happen. I'll just turn off my my green screen, and so you can see. Hang on. Here's the book. Here's the book. Can you figure out what it is yet? I just need to... There you go. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, illustrated by Charles Robinson. And very, very sadly, it only has 2 of its actual colour plates in it. Somebody has stripped them out. Not impressed. It's got a really cool line drawing for the end papers and front page art. And there's meant to be half a dozen images in it, but it's only got 2. It's got this one and another one. I'm not sure if these are the ones, these are by the artist that I actually put on over on our Discord server or not. But I was quite disappointed. I was excited when I found the book at Mum and Dad's, but I was very disappointed when I discovered that somebody had stripped the images out. And they do it on, some people do it on purpose. It's because artwork, even though they're prints of a certain era, is considered to be very sellable. And this one here, Losing and Finding, is from St. Sepulchre's Sunday School as second prize and awarded to Lawrence Lord, who, I will tell you who this is. This was my grandmother's brother, one of her brothers. Actually, I'll just turn off that. I'll turn on my green screen again so it has a bit more of a normal look to it. There you go. Lawrence Lord. And the reason I'm reading this to you now is, it's for general work and it was class 8. And then there's the superintendent's signature and the curate's signature, which means that it must have been an Anglican church. We don't have curates in the churches that I've ever been to. And he received it in July 1897. So, yeah, that's why it's looking a little old. This one has line drawings and etchings, based off etchings. There you go. See, there's a shop front with an awning over it as a chapter header. And little drawings like that. I wonder if actually, I think that might be a real... there's a full page etching. See? And look at the clothes. Those would have been normal clothes back then. Do you wear anything like that? Unless you're doing reenactment stuff and things like that. Nobody wears things like that anymore. But those were considered normal clothes for a certain class of English children in that era. The big floofy hat and the long sleeves. And they're out in the garden, so that means it's summer. Whew. And yes, it does get warm in England. I know, I've lived there. And the boy in the knickerbockers and boots that come halfway up to his knees and a sailor suit. Well, sailor jacket, top. Anyway, all that sort of stuff. So this is one that we shall probably read a little bit further on in the future. And in the meantime, let's read Just William. And you can go and you can actually find out some more about Just William and the author online. It's a good way to find out a little bit more. So if you join our Discord server, you can actually contribute to with what you find out. It's great. It's lots of fun. There's not many people there yet, so you're welcome to join in. Let's carry on. Chapter 1. William goes to the pictures. It all began with William's aunt, who was in a good temper that morning and gave him $1 for posting a letter for her and carrying her parcels from the grocer's. I can't remember when this one was written, and you can look that one up for me and write it in the chat because I can't remember, and I'm not going to start typing now because it's been too long since we started. That's 10 minutes already. Buy some sweets or go to the pictures, she said carelessly as she gave it to him. William walked slowly down the road, gazing thoughtfully at the coin. After deep calculations, based on the fact that $1 is the equivalent of 2 sixpences, he came to the conclusion that both luxuries could be indulged in. Now, $1 back in those days was 12 pence. That's value. When they went to metric, decimal currency in New Zealand, the equivalent was a 10-cent piece. And they were, about this big. It's a bit hard for me to describe it to you. It's the equivalent, if you're American, of a dime in terms of the numerical value of it. Doesn't matter. Sixpence was 5 cents or a nickel, or 5p if you're in England. After deep calculations based on the fact that $1 is the equivalent of 2 sixpences, he came to the conclusion that both luxuries could be indulged in. In the matter of sweets, William frankly upheld the superiority of quantity over quality. Moreover, he knew every sweet shop within a 2-mile radius of his home whose proprietor added an extra sweet after the scale had descended, and he patronised these shops exclusively. With a solemn face and eager eye, he always watched the process of weighing, and stingy shops were known and banned by him. I'll just give a short explanation. Sweets, if you buy sweets, otherwise known as lollies in New Zealand, candy in the States. In New Zealand, when I was growing up, you'd go into a dairy, a corner store, and you would buy, say, a mixed bag of lollies or something like that. And tell them how much money you had, or they had little wee cubby holes with glass or perspex on the front with all these little clusters of lollies in the different sections. Each section would have a different sort, and they'd have them grouped by what their price value was, and you'd say, I'll have 2 of those and 3 of those and 1 of those, and not those 2, 1 of those ones and 1 of those ones instead. Must have been the bane of the shopkeepers' lives, because the number of kids who couldn't make up their mind. That's why you'd get a mixed bag of lollies, was the easiest way to do it. And even with a mixed bag, you could actually say, but not those ones, if there were certain ones you didn't like. In England, as I found out when I went over there to live there for 4 years, they do it differently. They do it like it is in the book, because the book is set in England and it's written in England, and they have jars. My hands are this big, but actually no, they're quite big jars, and they're up on the shelf behind the counter, usually. Sometimes they're in the window, and each jar has one sort of lollies or sweets, since we're talking about England, in it. And they do it by weight. So you say, I'll have 1/4 pound of whatever they are. Bullseyes, those are the black and white peppermint lollies that are round, that you suck on, because they're really hard and they hurt your teeth if you try and chew them, things like that. So you buy them by weight. And so that's why the author is talking about the proprietor adding an extra sweet after the scale has descended. So the shopkeeper would take the jar of lollies off the shelf, the jar of sweets off the shelf, take the lid off, put the lid down, and then pour them into the set of scales, which are calibrated for small quantities. Pour them in until the scales tipped at the right point for how much the child is buying. In the old days, you'd put the weight of the sort that you want, like a 1/4 pound measure weight, standard weight, on one side, and in the the metal bowl on the other side, you then pour the lollies in, and when it's got the weight end down, because the bowl is empty, you then pour in lollies until it comes, and then it changes until it gets level. And that's when you know you have the same amount of lollies weight-wise in one side as the standard weight is on the other. And so what William is doing is, some of the proprietors, they would weigh it, and then after they'd finished weighing, they'd put an extra one in. So those are the places that William went to, because you got extras without having to pay for them. Smart kid. Anyway, carry on. I just didn't know if you'd actually been to a shop that weighed out the lollies like that instead of counting them out, which is how we did. We'd have some of them that were 3 for 1 cent and things like that. But yeah, they still weigh them over in England. The shops, the ones that aren't pre-packed, they will still weigh them out. Actually, they might not do now, but they used to when I was over there. Anyway, William, he wandered now to his favourite confectioner and stood outside the window for 5 minutes, torn between the rival attractions of gooseberry eyes, it's probably the shape and the colour of them, and marble balls. Both were sold at 4 ounces for 2p. Actually, it's D back then when this is written, but I'm saying p because they mean penny. It's an old penny. New pennies are actually written as a p. Old pennies are written as a D. I don't know. You can look that one up too. British currency. Both were sold at 4 ounces for 2p. William never purchased more expensive luxuries. Nothing worth any more than that. At last his frowning brow relaxed and he entered the shop. 6 penn'orth of gooseberry eyes, he said, with a slightly self-conscious air. The extent of his purchases rarely exceeded a penny. So 6 penn'orth is a lot more. 6 pennies worth. 6 penn'orth. That's a lot more. Hello, said the shopkeeper in amused surprise. Got a bit of money this morning, explained William carelessly, with the air of a Rothschild, one of the most rich families of the world at the time this was written. He watched the weighing of the emerald green dainties with silent intensity, saw with satisfaction the extra one added after the scale had fallen, received the precious paper bag, and putting 2 sweets into his mouth, walked out of the shop. Sucking slowly, he walked down the road towards the picture palace. That's the cinema. William was not in the habit of frequenting picture palaces. He had only been there once before in his life. It was a thrilling program. First came the story of desperate crooks who, on coming out of any building, glanced cautiously up and down the street in huddled, crouched attitudes, then crept ostentatiously on their way in a manner guaranteed to attract attention and suspicion at any place and time. The plot was involved. They were pursued by police, they leapt on a moving train, and then, for no accountable reason, leapt from that onto a moving motor car, and from that they plunged into a moving river. It was thrilling, and William was thrilled. Sitting quite motionless, he watched with wide, fascinated eyes, though his jaws never ceased their rotatory movement, and every now and then his hand would go mechanically to the paper bag on his knees and convey a gooseberry eye to his mouth. The next play was a simple country love story, in which figured a simple country maiden wooed by the squire, who was marked out as the villain by his mustachios. After many adventures, the simple country maiden was won by a simple country son of the soil, in picturesque rustic attire, whose emotions were faithfully portrayed by gestures that must have required much gymnastic skill. The villain was finally shown languishing in a prison cell, still indulging in frequent eyebrow play. Yes, that sort of stuff. They used to be so... Go and watch an old movie and you will see the over-dramatization, the melodramatic way that they used to do things. Go and have a look on old movies. Where would you watch old movies? On Twitch, there's an old movies channel. You can have a look at one there. Otherwise, have a look on... Sometimes you can find them on YouTube, but also on archive.org. the Internet Archive, you will often find old movies there, and you want something that's probably a black and white. It will be black and white. It's probably a silent movie, but they're really dramatic, over dramatic. And this is back in the day where there was one movie theatre, or cinema, or picture palace, whichever terminology you wish to use, going to the flicks. There would be one in a town, and that would be it. And you got whatever it was they were showing. There was no other choice. There was just that movie, and that was it. Anyway, they didn't have the technology that we have for having a wide variety. And it used to, relatively speaking, for the type of movie they were making, it actually cost a lot compared with what it would cost to make the same sort of movie now. Just because we've progressed so far in terms of what we can do and how we can do it. Next came another love story, this time a noble-hearted couple, consumed with mutual passion and kept apart not only by a series of misunderstandings possible only in a picture play, but also by maidenly pride and reserve on the part of the heroine and manly pride and reserve on the part of the hero that forced them to hide their ardour beneath a cold and haughty exterior. The heroine's brother moved through the story like a good fairy, tender and protective towards his orphan sister, and ultimately explaining to each the burning passion of the other. It was moving and touching, and William was moved and touched. The next was a comedy. It began by a solitary workman engaged upon the repainting of a door, and ended with a miscellaneous crowd of people, all covered with paint, falling downstairs on top of one another. It was amusing. William was riotously and loudly amused. Lastly came the pathetic story of a drunkard's downward path. He began as a wild young man in evening clothes, drinking intoxicants and playing cards. Not drinking, playing cards, but playing cards was one of his activities, in case you didn't figure that one out. He had a small child with a pious and superior expression, who spent her time weeping over him and exhorting him to a better life, till in a moment of justifiable exasperation he threw a beer bottle at her head. He then bedewed her bed in hospital with penitent tears. In other words, he did actually hit her, and so she was hospitalised. And then he wept over her, tore out his hair, flung up his arms toward heaven, beat his waistcoat, and clasped her to his breast, so that it was not to be wondered that, after all that excitement, the child had a relapse, and with the words, "Goodbye, Father, do not think what you have done, I forgive you," passed peacefully away. William drew a deep breath at the end, and still sucking on a gooseberry eye, arose with the throng and passed out, because in those days you didn't have standard feature lengths. You had a selection of different things for a showing. Anyway, once outside, he glanced cautiously around and slunk down the road in the direction of his home, reminiscent of something. Then he doubled suddenly and ran down a back street to put his imaginary pursuers off his track. He took a pencil from his pocket and, levelling it at the empty air, fired twice. 2 of his pursuers fell dead. The rest came on with redoubled vigour. There was no time to be lost. Running for dear life, he dashed down the next street, leaving in his wake an elderly gentleman nursing his toe and cursing volubly. As he neared his gate, William again drew his pencil from his pocket, and still looking back down the road and firing as he went, he rushed into his own gateway. William's father, who had stayed at home that day because he had a bad headache and a touch of liver, not quite sure what a touch of liver is, picked himself up from the middle of a rhododendron bush and seized William by the back of his neck. "You young ruffian," he roared, "what do you mean by charging into me like that?" William gently disengaged himself. "I wasn't charging, father," he said meekly. "I was only just coming in at the gate, same as other folks. I just wasn't looking just the way you were coming, but I can't look all ways at once, 'cause—" "Be quiet!" roared his father. Like the rest of the family, he dreaded William's eloquence. In other words, get him started and it's hard to stop him. What's that on your tongue? Put your tongue out. William obeyed. The colour of William's tongue would have put to shame spring's freshest tints. How many times am I to tell you, bellowed William's father, that I won't have you going about eating filthy poisons all day between meals? It's not filthy poison, said William. It's just a few sweets Aunt Susan gave me because I kindly went to the post office for her and... Be quiet! Have you got any more of the foul things? They're not foul things, said William doggedly. They're good. Just have one and try. They're just a few sweets Aunt Susan kindly gave me and... Be quiet! Where are they? Slowly and reluctantly, William drew forth his bag. His father seized it and flung it far into the bushes. For the next 10 minutes, William conducted a thorough and systematic search among the bushes and for the rest of the day consumed gooseberry eyes and garden soil in fairly equal proportions. I'm just going to show you the picture where he barges in through the gate. Looking back down the road and firing his pencil wildly, William dashed into his own gate. There you go. And the man being knocked over into the bushes is his father. Oops. Sorry, my chair is doing its rolling backwards thing again. There you go, that's better. Find the right page. He wandered round to the back garden and climbed onto the wall. Hello, said the little girl next door, looking up. Something about the little girl's head and curls reminded William of the simple country maiden. There was a touch of the artistic temperament about William. He promptly felt himself the simple country son of the soil. Hello, Joan, he said in a deep, husky voice intended to be expressive of intense affection. Have you missed me while I've been away? Didn't know you'd been away, said Joan. What are you talking so funny for? I'm not talking funny, said William in the same husky voice. I can't help talking like this. You've got a cold, that's what you've got. That's what Mother said when she saw you splashing about with your rain tub this morning. She said next thing that we shall hear of William Brown will be that he's in bed with a cold. It's not a cold, said William mysteriously. It's just the way I feel. What are you eating? Gooseberry eyes. Like one? He took the packet from his pocket and handed it down to her. Go on, take 2, 3, he said in reckless generosity. But they're dirty. Go on, it's only ordinary dirt. It soon sucks off. They're jolly good. He poured a shower of them lavishly down to her. I say, no. I say, he said, reverting to his character of simple country lover, did you say you'd missed me? I bet you didn't think of me as much as I did of you. I just bet you didn't. His voice had sunk deeper and deeper till it almost died away. I say, William, does your throat hurt you awful that you've got to talk like that? Her blue eyes were anxious and sympathetic. William put one hand to his throat and frowned. A bit, he confessed lightly. Oh, William, she clasped her hands, does it hurt all the time? Her solicitude was flattering. I don't talk much about it anyway, do I? He said manfully. She started up and stared at him with big blue eyes. Oh, William, is it your lungs? I've got an aunt that's got lungs and she coughs and coughs. William coughed hastily. And it hurts her and makes her awful bad. Oh, William, I do hope you've not got lungs. Lungs is probably tuberculosis or it could be whooping cough or it could be anything else where you get a chest infection and a pneumonia where it stays in your chest and you end up coughing because your body is trying to clear it. But the kids' ways of phrasing things after they've heard the parents talking about stuff is quite amusing. Oh, William, I do hope you've not got lungs. Her tender, anxious little face was upturned to him. I guess I've got lungs, he said, but I don't make a fuss about 'em. He coughed again. What does your doctor say about it? William considered a minute. He says it's lungs all right, he said at last. He says I gotta be jolly careful. William, would you like my new paint box? I don't think so. Not now. Thanks. I've got 3 balls and one's quite new. Wouldn't you like that, William? No, thanks. You see, it's no use my collecting a lot of things. You never know, with lungs. Oh, William! Her distress was pathetic. Of course, he said hastily, if I'm careful, it'll be all right. Don't you worry about me. Joan, from the house. That's Mother. Goodbye, dear William dear. If Father brings me home any chocolate, I'll bring it in to you. I will. Honest. Thanks for the gooseberry eyes. Goodbye. Goodbye, and don't worry about me, he added bravely. He put another gooseberry eye into his mouth and wandered round aimlessly to the front of the house. His grown-up sister Ethel... Oh, that's it. Sorry, I'm interrupting myself again. Last time I read, I said I'm probably going to be reading the Just William books. And because it was so long since I'd read them, I gave you some bad information. I said that I thought he was an only child. He's not. He's got an older sister, and I'm pretty certain he's got an older brother. And that, I think, is partly why he's not a spoilt brat, which is how they often depicted them if they're an only child in this era of writing. Excuse me, I just need to. As William's lungs are doing me throat in. Anyway, so yeah, he's the youngest, and he's a bit of a rapscallion. Anyway, we'll carry on. Sorry. His grown-up sister Ethel was at the front door, shaking hands with a young man. I'll do all I can for you, she was saying earnestly. Their hands were clasped. I know you will, he said equally earnestly. Both look and hand clasp were long. The young man walked away. Ethel stood at the door gazing after him with a faraway look in her eyes. William was interested. That was Jack Morgan, wasn't it? He said. Yes, said Ethel absently, and went into the house. The look, the long hand clasp, the words lingered in William's memory. They must be jolly fond of each other, like people are when they're engaged. But he knew they weren't engaged. Perhaps they were too proud to let each other know how fond they were of each other, like the man and the girl at the pictures. Ethel wanted a brother like the one in the pictures to let the man know she was fond of him. Wanted as in needed. This is obviously William's assessment. To let the man know she was fond of him. Then a light came suddenly into William's mind, and he stood deep in thought. Oh dear. Inside the drawing room, Ethel was talking to her mother. He's going to propose to her next Sunday. He told me about it because I'm her best friend, and he wanted to ask me if I thought he'd any chance. I said I thought he had, and I said I'd try to and prepare her a little and put in a good word for him if I could. Isn't it thrilling? Yes, dear. By the way, did you see William anywhere? I do hope he's not in mischief. He was in the front garden a minute ago. She went to the window. He's not there now, though. William had just arrived at Mr. Morgan's house. The maid showed him into Mr. Morgan's sitting room. Mr. Brown, she announced. The young man rose to receive his guest with politeness, not unmixed with bewilderment. His acquaintance with William was of the slightest. Good afternoon, said William. I've come from Ethel. Yes, yes. William fumbled in his pocket and at last drew forth a rosebud, slightly crushed by its close confinement in the company of the gooseberry eyes, a penknife, a top, it's a spinning top, a small one, and a piece of putty, the things you find in a boy's pockets. She sent you this, said William gravely. Mr. Morgan gazed at it with the air of one who is sleepwalking. Yes, very kind of her. Kinder keepsake. Souvenir, explained William. I'm going to show you the picture in the book. There you go. There's William sitting down, handing over the rose to Mr. Morgan, Jack Morgan. Yes. Any message? Oh, yes. She wants you to come in and see her this evening. Yes, of course. I've just come from her. Perhaps she remembered something she wanted to tell me after I'd gone. Perhaps, said William. Then he said, at any particular time? No, about 7, I expect. Oh, yes. Mr. Morgan's eyes were fixed with a fascinated, wondering gaze upon the limp and by no means spotless Rosebud. You say she sent this? Yes. And no other message? No. Well, say I'll come with pleasure, will you? Yes. Silence. Then, she thinks an awful lot of you, Ethel does. Mr. Morgan passed a hand over his brow. Yes, kind. Very kind, I'm sure. Always talking about you in her sleep, went on William, warming to his theme. I sleep in the next room and I can hear her talking about you all night, just saying your name over and over again. Jack Morgan, Jack Morgan, Jack Morgan. William's voice was husky and soulful, just like that, over and over again. Jack Morgan, Jack Morgan, Jack Morgan. Mr. Morgan was speechless. He sat gazing with horror-stricken face at his young visitor. Are you sure? He said at last. It might be someone else's name. No, 'tisn't, said William firmly. It's yours, Jack Morgan, Jack Morgan, Jack Morgan, just like that. And she eats just nothing now, always hanging around the windows to watch you pass. The perspiration stood out in beads on Mr. Morgan's brow. It's horrible, he said at last in a hoarse whisper. William was gratified. The young man had at last realized his cruelty, but William never liked to leave a task half done, so he sat on and calmly and silently considered his next statement. Mechanically he put a hand into his pocket and conveyed a gooseberry eye to his mouth. Mr. Morgan also sat in silence with a stricken look upon his face, gazing into vacancy. She's got your photo, said William at last, fixed up into one of those little round things on a chain around her neck. Are you sure? Said Mr. Morgan desperately. Sure's fate, said William, rising. Well, I'd better be going. She particular wanted to see you alone tonight. Goodbye. But Mr. Morgan did not answer. He sat huddled up in his chair, staring in front of him, long after William had gone jauntily on his way. Then he moistened his dry lips. One of the things with the Just William stories is you can see where it's going, but you read on anyway, just to see how it's going to work. Then he moistened his dry lips. Good Lord, he groaned. William was thinking of the pictures as he went home. The painter one was jolly good. When they all got all over paint, and when they all fell downstairs, William suddenly guffawed out loud at the memory. But what had the painter chap been doing at the very beginning before he went to paint? He'd been getting off the old paint with a sort of torch thing and a knife. Then he began putting the new paint on, just sort of melting the old paint and then scraping it off. William had never seen it done in real life, but he supposed that was the way you did get old paint off, melting it with some sort of fire, then scraping it off. He wasn't sure whether it was that, but he could find out. As he entered the house, he took his penknife from his pocket, opened it thoughtfully, and went upstairs. A penknife is what we would call a pocket knife, and it's usually a fairly simple knife. It's a folding knife, like a simple pocket knife. It doesn't usually have a lot of extra pieces on it, like a modern pocket knife, but it's called a penknife because it's used for sharpening a pen which we would call a quill pen because it's made from a feather shaft. And the hollowness and then the way you shape the tip and then split it means that when you dip the pen into ink, it holds a little bit of ink in it for you to be able to write a bit before you have to dip again. So it's for using as a type of dip pen. So that's why you have a pen knife, and that's what's in his pocket. Because, of course, every boy, young boy who could have a pocket knife would have had a pocket knife, except that they were called pen knives. Anyway, pen knife. Finding the right place. As he entered the house, he took his penknife from his pocket, opened it thoughtfully, and went upstairs. Mr. Brown came home about dinner time. "How's your head, father?" said Ethel sympathetically. "Rotten," said Mr. Brown, sinking wearily into an armchair. "Perhaps dinner will do it good," said Mrs. Brown. "It ought to be ready now." The housemaid entered the room. "Mr. Morgan, mum. He wants to see Miss Ethel. I've shown him into the library." "Now?" exploded Mr. Brown. Obviously, Mr. Brown's not feeling good. I think he's also got a job that's a little bit high pressure, so he's a bit under stress. What the dickens is the young idiot coming at this time of day?" "Why the dickens? Sorry. 7 o'clock. What time does he think we have dinner?" Obviously, commonly they had dinner at 7. "What does he mean by coming round paying calls on people at dinner time? What—" "Ethel, dear," interrupted Mrs. Brown, "do go and see what he wants and get rid of him as soon as you can." Ethel entered the library, carefully closing the door behind her to keep out the sound of her father's comments, which were plainly audible across the hall. She noticed something wan and haggard looking on Mr. Morgan's face as he rose to greet her. Good evening, Miss Brown." "Good evening, Mr. Morgan." Then they sat in silence, both awaiting some explanation of the visit. The silence became oppressive. Mr. Morgan, with an air of acute misery and embarrassment, shifted his feet and coughed. Ethel looked at the clock. Then, "Was it raining when you came, Mr. Morgan?" "Raining? No, not at all." Silence. "I thought it looked like rain this afternoon." "Yes, of course. No, not at all." Silence. "It does make the roads so bad round here when it rains." "Yes," said Mr. Morgan, who put up a hand as though to loosen his collar. Very bad." Loose metal roads, not sealed roads. Because unless you were in the city where it was cobbled streets and stuff, you didn't have the sort of seal we do now, probably. "Almost impassable." She's trying to make conversation desperately because she has no idea why he's there. And he's just there because he's been told to be there, not because he's got anything specific to do or say. "Almost impassable." Quite." Silence again. Inside the drawing room, Mr. Brown was growing restive. "Is dinner to be kept waiting for that youth all night? 7:15. You know it's just what I can't stand, having my meals interfered with. Is my digestion to be ruined simply because this young nincompoop chooses to pay his social calls at 7 o'clock at night?" "Then we must ask him to dinner," said Mrs. Brown desperately. "We really must." "We must not," said Mr. Brown. "Can't I stay away from the office for one day with a headache without having to entertain all the young jackasses for miles round?" The telephone bell rang. He raised his hands above his head. "Oh, I'll go, dear," said Mrs. Brown hastily. Sorry. She returned with a worried frown on her brow. "It's Mrs. Clive. She says Joan has been very sick because of some horrible sweets William gave her. And she said she is so sorry to hear about William and hoped he'd be better soon. I couldn't quite make it out, but it seems that William has been telling them that he had to go and see a doctor about his lungs, and the doctor said they were very weak and he'd have to be careful." Mr. Brown sat up and looked at her. "But why on earth?" he said slowly. "I don't know, dear," said Mrs. Brown helplessly. "I don't know anything about it." "He's mad," said Mr. Brown with conviction. "Mad! It's the only explanation." Then came the opening and shutting of the front door, and Ethel entered. She was very flushed. "He's gone," she said. "Mother, it's simply horrible. He didn't tell me much, but it seems that William actually went to his house and told him that I wanted to see him alone at 7 o'clock this evening. I've hardly spoken to William today. He couldn't have misunderstood anything I said, and he actually took a flower with him, a dreadful-looking rosebud, and said I'd sent it. I simply didn't know where to look or what to say. It was horrible." Mrs. Brown sat gazing weakly at her daughter. Mr. Brown rose with the air of a man goaded beyond endurance. We know what a goad is. We talked about those the other day. "Where is William?" he said shortly. "I don't know, but I thought I heard him go upstairs some time ago." William was upstairs. For the last 20 minutes he had been happily and quietly engaged upon his bedroom door with a lighted taper in one hand. A taper is used for lighting the fire. Matches were quite expensive, so if you had a fire source within your house, you kept it going, and then you used a taper to transfer it from one heat source to another. So if you have a lantern that's going, you put a taper into it. A taper can be like a super thin candle, like a birthday candle, but long. It can actually be also what we have heard of as a spill, which is where it's a twist of paper. It can also be a long, thin sliver, not slither because it's not slithering around like a snake, long, thin sliver of wood. And you use it as a flame source. So I'm guessing that this sort of taper is one of the candle style ones if it's producing a flame, which we will see why in a minute. Had been happily and quietly engaged upon his bedroom door with a lighted taper in one hand and penknife in the other. There was no doubt about it. By successful experiment, he had proved that that was the way you got old paint off. And I'm going to show you a picture before I read the next bit. William was happily and quietly engaged in burning the paint off his bedroom door. And it's a little hard to see the detail, but there's William up against the back of his bedroom door, and you can see the smoke rising here from the taper and the paint. When Mr. Brown came upstairs, he had entirely stripped one panel of its paint. And then there's a break in the story here, but we're still in the same chapter. An hour later, William sat in the back garden on an upturned box, sucking with a certain dogged defiance the last and dirtiest of the gooseberry eyes. Sadly, he reviewed the day. It had not been a success. His generosity to the little girl next door had been misconstrued into an attempt upon her life. His efforts to help on his only sister's love affair had been painfully misunderstood. Lastly, because among other things, he had discovered a perfectly scientific method of removing old paint, he had been brutally assaulted by a violent and unreasonable parent. Suddenly, William began to wonder if his father drank. He saw himself through a mist of pathos as a drunkard's child, as in the movies. He tried to imagine his father weeping over him in hospital and begging his forgiveness. It was a wonder he wasn't there now anyway. His shoulders drooped. His whole attitude became expressive of extreme dejection. Inside the house, his father, reclining at length in an armchair, discoursed to his wife on the subject of his son. One hand was pressed to his aching brow, and the other gesticulating freely. "He's insane," he said. "Stark, raving insane. You ought to take him to a doctor and get his brain examined. Look at him today. He begins by knocking me into the middle of the rhododendron bushes, under no provocation, mind you. I hadn't spoken to him. Then he tries to poison that nice little thing next door with some vile stuff I thought I'd thrown away. Then he goes about telling people he's consumptive. He looks it, doesn't he? In other words, he doesn't. Then he takes extraordinary messages and love tokens from Ethel to strange young men and brings them here just when we're going to begin dinner, and then goes round burning and hacking at the doors. Where's the sense in it? In any of it? They're the acts of a lunatic. You ought to have his brain examined." Mrs. Brown cut off her darning wool and laid aside the sock she had just finished darning. "It certainly sounds very silly, dear," she said mildly, "but there might be some explanation of it all. If only we knew. Boys are such funny things." She looked at the clock and went over to the window. "William," she called, "it's your bedtime, dear." William rose sadly and came slowly into the house. "Good night, mother," he said. Then he turned a mournful and reproachful eye upon his father. "Good night, father," he said. "Don't think about what you've done. He stopped and decided, hastily but wisely, to retire with all possible speed. I think his father was about to come after him with a slipper or something. Anyway, that's the end of that chapter. And I shall have a drink and something to eat, and I think you should too. Water time. You can drink whatever you like, but I'm drinking water. It's good for the time of day it is here. And it's good to keep you hydrated, because being hydrated helps your brain. I'm going to give you a couple of links because I always forget. First of all, I have to put it in the cursor in the right place. And sorry about the thunking. My microphone stand sits on my keyboard shelf. Otherwise, it's too far away. Anyway, so Discord. We have a Discord server, and I'm trying to get better at it. But it's a good place for chatting with anyone else who's been here, who's joined the Discord server, and sharing things you discover about the books that we read, or discussing possible future books. We had a discussion a while back about some books that we were wondering about, and I've added them to my list, some of them. Suggestions are great, but I read old-fashioned children's books, not modern ones. Not ones where there's going to be a huge copyright incident because whoever the copyright holder is sees themselves as losing money out because I'm reading their book. So that's why that's a part of the choice of the sort of books we read. So if it's super popular and doing really well at the moment, probably not worth suggesting, sorry. But if it's something that you remember reading, or you've come across somewhere, or you've watched a movie that was based on an old book, or you've got vague memories of a book that you can't remember how it goes, but you want some help to find it and then maybe have it read aloud, great, go for it. Come and suggest it in the general chat. Otherwise, I'm starting to get some sub-channels where for each book. So I've got Heidi there, and it's got pictures from one of the books that were one of the versions of one of the sets of illustrations from one of the Heidi books, one of the editions of Heidi. That's what I'm trying to say. And also, it's a good way to put information that you found out about, strange words that we've come across, words that you didn't know about, or words that you knew about but you knew that I didn't know about. Put them in there if it's a good way to keep in touch with each other outside of when I'm live. Because this chat doesn't stay active. If I'm not there, I don't get to see it. I only get to see what's there, what's typed there after I've arrived. And the same goes for you. So yeah, in Discord, that doesn't happen. It's a bit like an old-fashioned bulletin board. And the other thing is YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you've already found me. Congratulations. And welcome to the family. If you're watching this on Twitch, and especially if you're watching it live, the Twitch recordings last on Twitch for 2 weeks, and then Twitch just lets them go because they have so many people using their service. They don't have enough server space to actually save all of everything. It's just huge numbers. It's silly numbers. But what I do is I save those, I trim off the overlays, so you get this picture here without the chat box on the side over there, that chat box and the title and the bits up the top and the picture of the book up there and all that sort of stuff. I take all that off because you can't interact with it anymore anyway, and I put them over on YouTube, and I put them into playlists per book. So if you're wanting to listen to a whole story, even if you can't do it in one session, that's fine. You don't have to go searching for the rest of the book. It's already in the playlist. So even you can follow a link and find one of the books and just carry on from there. Great way to listen to things while you have to work if you're doing a hands busy job but not a brain busy job. Yeah, cool. Anyway, so I'm going to carry on reading after I've had a snack of some of my popcorn. Thank you, Minnie, for reminding me. I'm probably going to have somebody walk in downstairs and ask me if I'm reading or not, just because I'm not actually talking out loud at the moment, so they can't hear me reading. So they're thinking I've finished. I am going to see how long this... Oh, it's a long one. Oh dear. I better get started. Okay. I'm reading Just William by Richmal Crompton. Yep, that's how it's written. And I'm reading Chapter 2, William the Intruder. She's different from everybody else in the world, stammered Robert ecstatically. You simply couldn't describe her. No one could. His mother continued to darn his socks and made no comment. Sounds like William's mother. Well, this says it's Robert's mother, but yeah. Only William, his younger brother, showed interest. So William's mother seems to spend a lot of time darning socks. Thankfully, I don't do that. How's she different from anyone else? William demanded. Is she blind or lame or something? Robert turned on him with exasperation. Oh, go and play at trains, he said. A child like you can't understand anything. So I think now we've met all of William's family. We've got William's father, William's mother, William's older sister Ethel, and William's older brother Robert. Yes, Robert. William retired with dignity to the window and listened with interest unabated to the rest of the conversation. Yes, but who is she, dear? Said her mother. Robert, I can't think how you get these big holes in your heels. Robert ran his hands wildly through his hair. I've told you who she is, mother, he said. I've been talking about her ever since I came into the room. Yes, I know, dear, but you haven't mentioned her name or anything about her. Well, Robert spoke with an air of superhuman patience, she's a Miss Cannon and she's staying with the Clives, and I met her out with Mrs. Clive this morning and she introduced me, and she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, and she... Yes, said Mrs. Brown hastily, you told me all that. Well, went on the infuriated Robert, we must have her to tea. I know I can't marry yet, not while I'm still at college, but I could get to know her. Not that I suppose she'd look at me. She's miles above me, miles above anyone. She's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. You can't imagine her. You wouldn't believe me if I described her. No one could describe her. She... Mrs. Brown interrupted him with haste. I'll ask Mrs. Clive to bring her over one afternoon. I've no more of this blue wool, Robert. I wish you didn't have your socks such different colours. I shall have to use mauve. It's right on the heel. It won't show. Robert gave a gasp of horror. You can't, Mother. How do you know it won't show? And even if it didn't show, the thought of it, it's a crisis of my life now I've met her. I can't go about feeling ridiculous. I say, said William open-mouthed, are you spoony on her? William, don't use such vulgar expressions, said Mrs. Brown. Robert just feels a friendly interest in her. Don't you, Robert? A friendly interest, groaned Robert in despair. No one ever tries to understand what I feel. After all I've told you about her, and then that she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, and miles above me and above anyone, and you think I feel a friendly interest in her? It's the one great passion of my life. Well, put in Mrs. Brown mildly, I'll ring up Mrs. Clive and ask her if she's doing anything tomorrow afternoon. Robert's tragic young face lit up. Then he stood wrapped in thought, and a cloud of anxiety overcast it. Ellen, not Alan. Ellen can press the trousers of my brown suit tonight, can't she? And, Mother, could you get me some socks and a tie before tomorrow? Blue, I think, a bright blue, you know, not too bright, but not so as you don't notice them. I wish the laundry was a decent one. You know, a man's collar ought to shine when it's new on. They never put a shine on them. I'd better have some new ones for tomorrow, collars, because they're a separate item in the clothes they wore back then. It's so important how one looks. People judge you on how you look. Mrs. Brown laid her work aside. I'll go and ring Mrs. Clive now, she said. Poor lady. When she returned, William had gone, and Robert was standing by the window, his face pale with suspense and a Napoleonic frown on his brow, concentrating, thinking about something off in the distance. Mrs. Clive can't come, announced Mrs. Brown in her comfortable voice, but Miss Cannon will come alone. It appears she's met Ethel before, so you needn't worry any more, dear. Robert gave a sardonic laugh. Worry, he said. There's plenty to worry about still. What about William? Well, what about him? Well, can't he go away somewhere tomorrow? Things never go right when William's there. You know they don't. Anyone would think this author has written several books about William before, the way she just drops us into the story. It's excellent. The fact is, this is the first of the William books. And I don't know if she actually wrote any short stories about William before then. Anyway, she had been a school teacher, but I think she was at a girls' school. And then she got polio, and she survived the polio okay, but it paralysed one of her legs or something, so she couldn't walk properly, or she couldn't walk. I think she was stuck in a wheelchair, so she started writing kids' stories and other ones, but William stories. And she wrote quite a few of them. Anyway, the poor boy must have tea with us, dear. He'll be very good, I'm sure. Ethel will be home then and she'll help. I'll tell William not to worry you. I'm sure he'll be good. William had received specific instructions. So there's a slight break in the... every now and then I'll mention there's a break. This is what I mean. So you have the text here, and then the author has put in a line, and then there's some more text. It's like time has passed. We're now in another scene, but it's not enough to be a new chapter. Okay? So when I refer to a break, that's what it's about. William had received specific instructions. He was not to come into the house till the tea bell rang, and he was to go out and play in the garden again directly after tea. He was perfectly willing to obey them. He was thrilled he was thrilled by the thought of Robert in the role of the lovelorn hero. He took the situation quite seriously. I'm just checking what this one was called again. William the Intruder. He was in the garden when the visitor came up the drive. He had been told not to obtrude himself upon her notice, so he crept up silently and peered at her through the rhododendron bushes. The proceeding also happened to suit his character of the moment, which was that of a Red Indian chief, because back in those days, little boys often used to play cowboys and Indians. Miss Cannon was certainly pretty. She had brown hair, brown eyes, and dimples that came and went in her rosy cheeks. She was dressed in white and carried a parasol. She walked up the drive looking neither right nor left, till a slight movement in the bushes arrested her attention. She turned quickly and saw a small boy's face, smeared black with burnt cork, and framed in hen's feathers tied on with tape. The dimples peeped out. "Hail, O great chief," she said. William gazed at her open-mouthed. Such intelligence on the part of a grown-up was unusual. Here you go. Here's the picture. There she is. Miss Cannon has recognised that he's an Indian chief. And his face is black because he's blacked it with burnt cork. "Chief Red Hand," he supplied with a fierce scowl. She bowed low, brown eyes alight with merriment. "And what death awaits the poor white face who has fallen defenceless into his hand?" "You'd better come quiet to my wigwam and see," said Red Hand darkly. She threw a glance to the bend in the drive behind which lay the house, and with a low laugh followed him through the bushes. She sounds like a lot of fun, actually. From one point, the drawing room window could be seen, and there the anxious Robert stood, pale with anxiety, stiff and upright in his newly creased trousers, well turned up to show the new blue socks. his soulful eyes fixed steadfastly on the bend in the drive round which the beloved should come. Every now and then his nervous hand wandered up to touch the new tie and gleaming new collar, which was rather too high and too tight for comfort, but which the shopkeeper had informed his harassed customer was the latest and most correct shape. So if you look up when this book was written, you'll discover the era that it was. And I'm thinking it's probably late Edwardian, going by the sort of clothes she was wearing and by the description of the clothes that Robert's wearing. So you'll find out, if you look up Edwardian clothing, if that's the area it's written in, you'll actually see why it is that Robert is so uncomfortable because he's trying to be fashionable. Meanwhile, the beloved had reached William's dugout. William had made this himself of branches cut down from the trees and spent many happy hours in it with one or other of his friends. "Here is the wigwam, Paleface," he said in a sepulchral voice. "Here is the wigwam, Paleface." With a hint of death. Sepulchral means with a hint of death. "Stand here while I decide with Snakeface and the other chiefs what's going to be done with you. There's Snakeface and the others," he added in his natural voice. "There's Snakeface and the others," he said in his natural voice, pointing to a small cluster of shrubs. Approaching these, he stood and talked fiercely and unintelligibly for a few minutes, turning his scowling, corked face and pointing his finger at her every now and then, as apparently he described his capture. Then he approached her again. "That was Red Indian what I was talking then," he explained in his ordinary voice, then sinking into its low, roaring note and scowling more ferociously than ever. "Snakeface says the Paleface must be scalped and cooked and eaten." He took out a penknife and opened it as though to perform the operation, then continued, "But me and the others say that if you'll be a squaw and cook for us, we'll let you go alive." Miss Cannon dropped onto her knees. "Most humble and grateful thanks, great Red Hand," she said. "I will with pleasure be your squaw." "I've got a fire round here," said William, proudly leading her to the back of the wigwam, where a small wood fire smouldered spiritlessly, choked by a large tin full of a dark liquid. "That, O squaw," said Red Hand with a dramatic gesture, "is a Paleface we caught last night." The squaw clasped her hands together. "Oh, how lovely," she said. "Is he cooking?" Red Hand nodded. Then, "I'll get you some feathers," he said obligingly. "You ought to have feathers too." He retired into the depths of the wigwam and returned with a handful of hen feathers. Miss Cannon took off her big shady hat and stuck the feathers into her fluffy brown hair with a laugh. "This is jolly," she said. "I love Red Indians." "I've got some cork you can have to do your face too," went on William with reckless generosity. "It soon burns in the fire." You can try that if you want. It's a bit of a mess, but you can try it. Singe the cork and then rub it on your skin and it will leave a black mark. She threw a glance towards the chimneys of the house that could be seen through the trees and shook her pretty head regretfully. "I'm afraid I'd better not," she said sadly. "Well," he said, "now I'll go hunting and you stir the Paleface and we'll eat him when I come back. Now I'll be off. You watch me track." He opened his clasp knife with a bloodthirsty flourish and, casting sinister glances round him, crept upon his hands and knees into the bushes. He circled about, well within his squaw's vision, obviously bent upon impressing her. She stirred the mixture in the tin with a twig and threw him every now and then the admiring glances he so evidently desired. Soon he returned, carrying over his shoulder a doormat, which he threw down at her feet. "A venison, O squaw," he said in a lordly voice. "Let it be cooked. I've had it out all morning." Added in his ordinary tones, "They've not missed it yet." He fetched from the wigwam 2 small jagged tins and, taking the larger tin off the fire, poured some into each. "Now," he said, "here's some Paleface for you, squaw." "Oh," she said, "I'm sure he's awfully good, but—" "You needn't be frightened of it," said William protectively. "It's jolly good, I can tell you." He picked up the paper cover of a packet of soup from behind the trees. "It's just that and water, and it's jolly good." "Oh, lovely. Do they let you?" "They don't let me," he burst in hastily. "But there's heaps in the larder, and they don't notice one every now and then. Go on," he said encouragingly. "I don't mind you having it. Honest, I don't. I'll get some more soon." So this is probably one of those powdered soup mixes like we use these days. Early days of them having them, I would guess, if they don't normally let him have them. Bravely, she raised the tin to her lips and took a sip. "Gorgeous," she said, shutting her eyes. Then she drained the tin. William's face shone with pride and happiness, but it clouded over as soon as the sound of a bell rang out from the house. "Crumbs, that's tea!" Hastily, Miss Cannon took the feathers from her hair and put on her hat. "You don't keep a looking-glass in your wigwam, I suppose?" she said. "No," admitted William, "but I'll get one for the next time you come. I'll get one from Ethel's room. Won't she mind?" "She won't know," said William simply. Miss Cannon smoothed down her dress. "I'm horribly late. What will they think of me? It was awful of me to come with you. I'm always doing awful things. That's a secret between you and me." She gave William a smile that dazzled him. "Now come in and we'll confess." "I can't," said William. "I've got to wash and come down tidy. I promised I would. It's a special day because of Robert, you know. Well, you know, because of Robert." He looked up at her mystified face with a significant nod. Robert was frantic. He had run his hands through his hair so often that it stood round his head like a spiked halo. "We can't begin without her," he said. "She'll think we're awful. It will put her off me forever. She's not used to being treated like that. She's the sort of girl people don't begin without. She's the most beautiful girl I've ever met in all my life, and you, my own mother, treat her like this. You may be ruining my life. You've no idea what this means to me. If you'd seen her, you'd feel more sympathy. I simply can't describe her. I said 4 o'clock, Robert," said Mrs. Brown firmly, "and it's after 1:30. Ethel, tell Emma she can ring the bell and bring in tea." The perspiration stood out on Robert's brow. It's the downfall of all my hopes," he said hoarsely. Then, a few minutes after the echo of the tea bell died away, the front door bell rang sharply. Robert stroked his hair down with wild, unrestrained movements of his hands and summoned a tortured smile to his lips. Miss Cannon appeared upon the threshold, bewitching and demure. "Aren't I perfectly disgraceful?" she said with her low laugh. "To tell the truth, I met your little boy in the drive, and I've been with him some time. He's a perfect little dear, isn't he?" Her brown eyes rested on Robert. Robert moistened his lips and smiled the tortured smile, but was beyond speech. "Yes, I know Ethel, and I met your son yesterday, wasn't it?" Robert murmured unintelligibly. Robert, this is the son that she met yesterday, unintelligibly, raising one hand to the too tight collar and then bowed vaguely in her direction. Then they went in to tea. William, his hair well brushed, the cork partially washed from his face, and the feathers removed, arrived a few minutes later. Conversation was carried on chiefly by Miss Cannon and Ethel. Robert racked his brain for some striking remark, something that would raise him in her esteem far above the ranks of the ordinary young man, but nothing came. Whenever her brown eyes rested on him, however, he summoned the mirthless smile to his lips and raised a hand to relieve the strain of the imprisoning collar. Desperately he felt the precious moments passing, and his passion yet unrevealed except by his eyes, whose message he was afraid she had not read. As they rose from tea, William turned to his mother with an anxious, sibilant whisper. "Oughtn't I to have put on my best suit too?" The demure lights danced in Miss Cannon's eyes, and the look the perspiring Robert sent him would have crushed a less bold spirit. William had quite forgotten the orders he had received to retire from the scene directly after tea. He was impervious to all hints. He followed in the train of the all-conquering Miss Cannon to the drawing-room and sat on the sofa with Robert, who had taken his seat next to his beloved. "Are you, fond of reading, Miss Cannon?" began Robert in a painful voice. "I wrote a tale once," said William boastfully, leaning over Robert before she could answer. "It was a jolly good one. I showed it to some people. I'll show it to you if you like. It began with a pirate on a raft, and he stole some jewellery, and the king the jewels belonged to was coming after him on a steamer, and just when he was coming up to him, he jumped into the water and took the jewels with him, and a fish ate the jewels, and the king caught it, and—" He paused for breath. "I'd love to read it," said Miss Cannon. Robert turned sideways, and resting an arm on his knee to exclude the persistent William, spoke in a husky voice. "What is your favourite flower, Miss Cannon?" That's the last of my coffee for the day. William's small head was craned round Robert's arm. "I got a garden. I've got Virginia stock growing all over it. It grows up in no time, and mustard cress grows in no time too. I like things what grow quick, don't you? You get tired of waiting for the other sorts, don't you?" Robert rose desperately. "Would you care to see the garden and greenhouses, Miss Cannon?" he said. "I'd love to," said Miss Cannon. With a threatening glare at William, Robert led the way to the garden, and William, all innocent animation, followed. And here's a picture of Robert trying to exclude William, and William leaning around his arm. Oh dear, that looks like 20s clothing. William's small head was craned round Robert's arm, or even earlier. That's what that picture is. "Can you tie knots what can't come untied?" he demanded. "No," she said. "I wish I could." "I can, I'll show you. I'll get a piece of string and show you afterwards. It's easy, but it wants practice, that's all. And I'll teach you how to make aeroplanes out of paper, what fly in the air when it's windy. That's quite easy. Only you've got to be careful to get them the right size. I can make them, and I can make lots of things out of matchboxes and things, and—" The infuriated Robert interrupted. "These are my father's roses. He's very proud of them." "They're beautiful," she said. "Well, wait till you see my Virginia stock, that's all. Wait." "Will you have this tea rose, Miss Cannon?" Robert's face was purple as he presented it. It suits you. You, flowers, and you, that is, I'm sure, you love flowers. You should, always have flowers if I—" "And I'll get you those red ones and that white one," broke in the equally infatuated William, determined not to be outshone. "And I'll get you some of my Virginia stock, and I don't give my Virginia stock to anyone," he added with emphasis. When they re-entered the drawing room, Miss Cannon carried a large bouquet of Virginia stock and white and red roses which completely hid Robert's tea rose. William was by her side, chattering airily and confidently. Robert followed, a pale statue of despair. In answer to Robert's agonised glance, Mrs. Brown summoned William to her corner, while Robert and Miss Cannon took their seat again upon the sofa. I hope, said Robert soulfully, "I hope your stay here is a long one." "Well, why shan't I just speak to her?" William's whisper was loud and indignant. "Shh, dear," said Mrs. Brown. "I should like to show you some of the walks round here," went on Robert desperately, with a fearful glance towards the corner where William stood in righteous indignation before his mother. "If I could have the pleasure, honour—" "I was only just speaking to her," went on William's voice. "I wasn't doing any harm, was I? Only speaking to her." The silence was intense. Robert, purple, opened his lips to say something, anything, to drown out that horrible voice, but nothing would come. Miss Cannon was obviously listening to William. "Is no one else ever to speak to her?" The sibilant whisper, raised in indignant appeal, filled all the room. "Just 'cause Robert's fallen in love with her?" The horror of the moment haunted Robert's nights and days for weeks to come. Mrs. Brown coughed hastily and began to describe at unnecessary length the ravages of the caterpillars upon her husband's favourite rose tree. William withdrew with dignity to the garden a minute later, and Miss Cannon rose from the sofa. "I must be going, I'm afraid," she said with a smile. Robert, anguished and overpowered, rose slowly. "You must come again sometime," he said weakly, but with passion undaunted. "I will," she said. "I'm longing to see more of William. I adore William." And there's a break. They comforted Robert's wounded feelings as best they could, but it was Ethel who devised a plan that finally cheered him up. She suggested a picnic on the following Thursday, which happened to be Robert's birthday, and incidentally, the last day of Miss Cannon's visit. And the picnic party was to consist of Robert, Ethel, Mrs. Clive, and Miss Cannon, and William was not even to be told where it was to be. Ooh. I'm sure there's room for trouble. The invitation was sent that evening, and Robert spent the week dreaming of picnic lunches and suggesting impossible dainties of which the cook had never heard. It was not until she threatened to give notice that he reluctantly agreed to leave the arrangements to her. He sent his white flannels, which were perfectly clean, to the laundry with a note attached, hinting darkly at legal proceedings if they were not sent back spotless by Thursday morning. White flannels is the white trousers and shirt, and often a sleeveless jersey that goes over it, that are often worn for summer sports in this era in England. Hang on, I just need to check. I think I heard the cat meow, and he's been sort of doing weird things. Yeah, I'll just ask someone to go and let the cat in. Sorry, I'll just text them. Right, carrying on now. Sorry about that. He goes out one door and he comes in a completely different one. But he wasn't well yesterday, or wasn't quite so well. He threw up a few times. And so if he wants to come in, I'd rather he came in than being stuck outside. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting a little bit warm because, as I said before, those skylights are shut. If they were not sent back spotless, this flannels, that's right, there's this white outfit that young men used to wear for not formal but good wear in summer, often also used as the basis of a sporting outfit. Tennis, I suppose, I don't know, cricket, maybe. White flannels, common, worn, summertime, picnics. He went about with an expression of set and solemn purpose upon his frowning countenance, not continence. William he utterly ignored. He bought a book of poems at a second-hand bookshop and kept them on the table by his bed. Oh dear, poetry. They saw nothing of Miss Cannon in the interval, but Thursday dawned bright and clear, and Robert's anxious spirits rose. He was presented with a watch and chain by his father, and with a bicycle by his mother, and a tin of coffee, given not without ulterior motive, by William. They met Mrs. Clive and Miss Cannon at the station, and took tickets to a village a few miles away, whence they had decided to walk to a shady spot on the river bank. William's dignity was slightly offended by his pointed exclusion from the party, but he had resigned himself to it and spent the first part of the morning in the character of Chief Red Hand among the rhododendron bushes. He had added an ostrich feather found in Ethel's room to his headdress and used almost a whole cork on his face. He wore the doormat pinned to his shoulders. So it's not a coir one of those spiky ones. It's a fabric one. After melting some treacle toffee in rainwater over his smoking fire, adding orange juice and drinking the resulting liquid, he tired of the game and wandered upstairs to Robert's bedroom to inspect his birthday presents. The tin of toffee, not coffee, tin of toffee, that makes more sense, was on the table by Robert's bed. William took one or two as a matter of course and began to read the love poems. He was horrified a few minutes later to see the tin empty. His hand automatically, while he's reading, sort of just nibbling while he's reading without thinking about it. Empty, but he fastened the lid with a sigh, wondering if Robert would guess who had eaten them. How would Robert not guess that? He was afraid he would. Anyway, he'd given him them, and anyway, he hadn't known he was eating them. He then went to the dressing table and tried on the watch and chain at various angles and with various postures. He finally resisted the temptation to wear them for the rest of the morning and replaced them on the dressing table. Then a pocket watch on a chain. That's watch and chain. Then he wandered downstairs and round to the shed, where Robert's new bicycle stood in all its glory. It was shining and spotless, and William gazed at it in awe and admiration. He came to the conclusion that he could do it no possible harm by leading it carefully round the house. Encouraged by the fact that Mrs. Brown was out shopping, he walked it round the house several times. He much enjoyed the feeling of importance and possession that it gave him. He felt loath to part with it. He wondered if it was very hard to ride. He had tried to ride one once when he was staying with an aunt. He stood on a garden bench and with difficulty transferred himself from that to the bicycle seat. To his surprise and delight, he rode for a few yards before he fell off. He tried again and fell off again. He tried again and rode straight into a holly bush. He forgot everything in his determination to master the art. He tried again and again. He fell off or rode into the holly bush again and again. The shining black paint of the bicycle was scratched. The handlebars were slightly bent and dulled because they would have been chromed or something. William himself was bruised and battered, but unbeaten. At last he managed to avoid the fatal magnet of the holly bush, to steer an unsteady zigzag course down the drive and out into the road. He had had no particular intention of riding into the road. In fact, he was still wearing his befeathered headgear, blackened face, and the mat pinned to his shoulders. It was only when he was actually in the road that he realized that retreat was impossible, that he had no idea how to get off the bicycle. What followed was to William more like a nightmare than anything else. He saw a motor lorry coming towards him. We would call that a truck, a small truck. Coming towards him, and in a sudden panic turned down a side street, and from that into another side street. People came out of their houses to watch him pass. Children booed or cheered him and ran after him in crowds, and William went on simply because he could not stop. His iron nerve had failed him. He had not even the presence of mind to fall off. He was quite lost. He had left the town behind him and did not know where he was going, but wherever he went he was the centre of attention. The strange figure, with blackened and streaked face, mat flying behind in the wind, and a headdress of feathers from which every now and then one floated away, brought the population to its doors. Some said that he had escaped from an asylum, some that he was an advertisement of something. The children were inclined to think he was part of a circus. William himself had passed beyond despair. His face was white and set. His first panic had changed to a dull certainty that this would go on forever. He would never know how to stop. He supposed he would go right across England. He wondered if he were near the sea now. He couldn't be far off. He wondered if he would ever see his mother and father again, and his feet pedalled mechanically along. They did not reach the pedals at their lowest point. They had to catch them as they came up and send them down with all their might. It was very tiring. William wondered if people would be sorry if he dropped down dead. I have said that William did not know where he was going, but fate knew. The picnickers walked down the hill from the little station to the riverbank. It was a beautiful morning. Robert, his heart and hopes high, walked beside his goddess, reveling in his nearness to her. Reveling in his nearness to her, though he could think of nothing to say to her. But Ethel and Mrs. Clive chattered gaily. "We've given William the slip," said Ethel with a laugh. "He's no idea where we've gone even." "I'm sorry," said Miss Cannon. "I'd have loved William to be here." "You don't know him," said Ethel fervently. "What a beautiful morning it is," murmured Robert, feeling that some remark was due from him. "Am I walking too fast for you, Miss Cannon?" "Oh, no. May I carry your parasol for you?" he inquired humbly. "Oh, no, thanks." He proposed a boat on the river after lunch, and it appeared that Miss Cannon would love it, but Ethel and Mrs. Clive would rather stay on the bank. His cup of bliss was full. It would be his opportunity of sealing a lifelong friendship with her, of arranging a regular correspondence and hinting at his ultimate intentions. He must tell her that, of course, while he was at college, he was not in a position to offer his heart and hand, but if she could wait, he began to compose speeches in his mind. They reached the bank and opened the luncheon baskets. Unhampered by Robert, the cook had surpassed herself. They spread the white cloth and took up their position around it under the shade of trees. Just as Robert was taking up a plate of sandwiches to hand them with a courteous gesture to Miss Cannon, his eyes fell upon the long white road leading from the village to the riverside and remained fixed there, his face frozen with horror. The hand that held the plate dropped lifelessly back again to the tablecloth. Their eyes followed his. A curious figure was cycling along the road, a figure with blackened face and a few drooping feathers on its head, and a doormat flying in the wind. A crowd of small children ran behind, cheering. It was a figure vaguely familiar to them all. "It can't be," said Robert hoarsely, passing a hand over his brow. No one spoke. It came nearer and nearer. There was no mistaking it. "William!" gasped 4 voices. William came to the end of the road. He did not turn aside to either of the roads by the riverside. He did not even recognize or look at them. With set, colourless face, he rode on to the riverbank and straight amongst them. They fled from before his charge. He rode over the tablecloth, over the sandwiches, patties, rolls, and cakes, down the bank and into the river. They rescued him and the bicycle. Fate was against Robert, even there. It was a passing boatman who performed the rescue. William emerged soaked to the skin, utterly exhausted, but feeling vaguely heroic. He was not in the least surprised to see them. He would have been surprised at nothing, and Robert wiped and examined his battery bicycle with impotent fury in the background, while Miss Cannon pillowed William's dripping head on her arm, fed him on hot coffee and sandwiches, and called him "my poor darling red hand." Oh dear. So here we go. Here's poor William, stuck on the bicycle, just churning onwards. He's looking all black because that's his face is blackened and the rest of him's probably dark clothing. Riding right through their picnic, she insisted on going home with him. All through the journey she sustained the character of his faithful squaw. Then, leaving a casual invitation to Robert and Ethel to come over to tea, she departed to pack. Mrs. Brown descended the stairs from William's room with a tray on which reposed a half-empty bowl of gruel, and met Robert in the hall. Robert, she remonstrated, you really needn't look so upset. Robert glared at her and laughed a hollow laugh. Upset, he echoed, outraged by the inadequacy of the expression. You'd be upset if your life was ruined. You'd be upset. I've a right to be upset. He passed his hand desperately through his already ruffled hair. You're going there to tea, she reminded him. Yes, he said bitterly, with other people. Who can talk with other people there? No one can. I'd have talked to her on the river. I'd got heaps of things ready in my mind to say, and William comes along and spoils my whole life and my bicycle. And she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my life, and I wanted to ride that bicycle. I've wanted to ride that bicycle for ever so long, and it's not fit to ride. But poor William has caught a very bad chill, dear, so you oughtn't to feel bitter to him, and he'll have to pay for your bicycle being mended. He'll have no pocket money till it's paid for. You'd think, said Robert with a despairing gesture in the direction of the hall table and apparently addressing it, you'd think 4 grown-up people in a house could keep a boy of William's age in order, wouldn't you? You'd think he wouldn't be allowed to go about spoiling people's lives and ruining their bicycles. Well, he jolly well won't do it again, he said darkly. Mrs. Brown proceeded in the direction of the kitchen. Robert, she said soothingly over her shoulder, you surely want to be at peace with your little brother when he's not well, don't you? Peace, he said. Robert turned his haggard countenance upon her as though his ears must deceived him. Peace! I'll wait till he's all right and going about. I won't start till then. But peace! It's not peace. It's an armistice. That's all. Oh my goodness. What's going to happen? Oh. Poor William. Have you ever had that happen? That's the end of the chapter, by the way, and today's reading. Have you ever had that happen where you start to do something and it's something that you've just got the hang of and you get started and you just don't know how to stop? It happens sometimes with conversations too, where you get started and you're talking and talking and talking and you've run out of words, you don't know what to say next, and you know you're starting to sound absolutely ridiculous, but the words just keep coming out of your mouth and you don't know how to just stop talking. And it's that sort of thing that happened to William, and poor William. Poor William. Mind you, he did go from not being able to ride a bike to being able to ride a bike in one afternoon. Wow. He does learn from life's experiences. He's very good at that. Anyway, so what do you think of our William? Hey? More next time. We are probably a quarter of the way into the book. They are long chapters because each chapter is a complete story about William. So that's chapters 1 and 2. So there's 11 chapters. No, 12 chapters, sorry. 12 chapters. But one of them is like in 2 parts, and we've had 2 of them, so we're about it. Not even a quarter of the way into the book. But it's good. It's lots of fun. And he's not trying to be malicious or difficult or naughty or anything like that. It's just he gets so caught up and so focused on what he's doing that he doesn't realise that it might not be the best thing to be doing. And his dad and his brother do not understand. They really don't. I think his sister and his mother probably understand better than his dad and his mother do. And his dad and his brother. Anyway, there you go. Just William by Richmal Crompton. Go and look her up, Richmal Crompton, and find out about it. It's amazing how well she's written the personality of this young lad, considering the fact that she didn't have kids of her own, as far as I know. And so therefore she wasn't writing, and also she'd had a different sort of a life herself, obviously, as a young woman. Writing, though, with a lot of imagination and really capturing what life must have been like for poor old William. Anyway, so we'll see you next time. I hope you've got lovely books to read in your own time, just to keep you going. And don't forget, stay hydrated and have fun. See you next time. Bye.